Breaking news. This just in. Lonesome housewife Miss Wright has been locked up on account of murdering her husband, John Wright. According to Mr. Hale, a friend of Mr. Wright's, he went to see Mr. Wright one night, proposing they split a party telephone. Nobody answered the door, so he helped himself in. Lo and behold, Miss Wright was sitting in the living room all alone. When Hale asked where John was, she replied with a laugh, "He's dead." When Mr. Hale and his friend Harry registered what Miss Wright had said, they investigated farther. To no surprise, they found his body upstairs with a rope tied around his neck. An investigation has taken place yesterday in order to obtain evidence against Miss Wright. The sheriff and his wife, Miss Peters, Mr. and Mrs. Hale, and the county attorney were all present for the investigation. Throughout the men's investigation, they found no evidence incriminating Miss Wright. The rope was their own, and no clues towards Miss Wright's motive were found. Although the men found nothing, Miss Peters and Miss Hale contacted me privately to reveal some groundbreaking evidence they found incriminating Miss Wright. Ladies, would you please explain to our viewers what you have found?
Of course. Throughout the men's investigations, they constantly disrespected the female gender, putting us down morally and socially. They said that we worry about little things too much and disrespected Mrs. Wright's efforts to maintain a household in an unrewarding relationship. We came down to you with this evidence in order to show the men that the little things do matter, and a wide, diverse perspective can bring a whole lot more to the table than the traditional views of men these days.
My husband is always pressuring me to do mundane household tasks all day, putting me down in an inferior position. And don't get me started on that nasty attorney. He always walks into Mrs. Wright's kitchen and uses her towels and has the audacity to be nasty to her while oppressing our gender. This is why we didn't tell those nasty, rude men what we knew. The truth isn't it. I'd say it's time for a change. Ladies, would you mind going into more detail about the evidence, please?
That's me. Alright.
He didn't put you.
Sorry, I didn't put me.
That is the truth, isn't it? Ladies.
I know, when I read it, I was like, that's weird, but...
Just keep going, because I can edit
You can
it.
edit
And
it?
you
can say it.
Alright. That's the truth, isn't it? I'd say it's about time for a change. Ladies, would you go into more detail about the evidence, please?
Yes, of course. The first evidence we noticed was when we were admiring Mrs. Wright's quilt. We noticed that Mrs. Wright had been stitching a beautiful quilt. Although, with a closer look, we realized that some of the stitching had been done poorly, as if she had been under some extreme stress.
I knew Mrs. Wright pretty well, and I knew she wouldn't have done poor stitching like that unless she was quite distressed. The next piece of evidence we found was quite odd, but little did we know holds key to the case. While Mrs. Peters was here looking in the cupboard for some string to fix the quilt, she discovered a bird cage which was awfully bent up and not in good shape. I knew that a man in town was selling canaries for a good price. Mrs. Wright always did remind me of a caged bird, singing freely and beautifully until locked up in that doggone marriage of hers.
At first, Mrs. Hale thought it was a cat that killed the bird, but I knew she didn't have a cat. Then we discovered a fancy box while looking for the sewing things that we found the dead bird wrapped up in there. We were a little freaked out. We noticed its neck was broken and it was brutally manhandled. Mrs. Peters knew that Mr. Wright wouldn't have liked that bird singing. He killed that bird just like he killed her lively personality and passion for singing. As we heard the men coming back downstairs, we frantically hid the bird from them. We couldn't tell them what we had found what they had been looking for, not after they had treated us so poorly. From what little I learned about Mrs. Wright while in her home, I could relate to how I think she feels. My baby died in Dakota when he was 2, and nothing can compare to that miserable feeling of not having a reason to go on with what I had. Mrs. Wright just suppressed her feelings for longer than I. Despite the fact that I can relate, the law needs to be respected and action needs to be taken towards her wrongdoing.
Although I have to agree with Mrs. Peters, everybody listening should know what kind of soul Minnie Foster was before she married Mr. Wright. She would spend her days singing in the choir, dressed and beautifully. Everybody wished they were as lively and in the moment as Minnie. Sadly, after she was married, they wouldn't have kids, and Mr. Wright spent her days doing hard work of maintaining a farm while being in the miserable, self-destructive relationship.
When the men went out to investigate the windows, I put the bird into my box. I put the bird box right into my coat just for this very moment. Bird box? Really? Isn't that a movie?
I wrote that wrong, right?
I put the bird box into my coat just for this very moment.
My bad. Put the box into my coat.
Yeah.
Put the bird box into my coat.
I was doing this pretty fast. All right, redo that line.
Okay. When the men went out to investigate the windows, I put the box. Cut.
All right.
Just start whenever, because I can cut it out.
Cut.
Chill. Alright. I'm good.
You sure?
Yeah.
Alright. When the men went out to investigate the windows, I put the box into my coat just for this very moment.
Alright, Miss Peters, there's really no need for that. You can put that away right now. Ladies, thank you very much for the time and this compelling new piece of evidence towards the Wright murder. I hope this story teaches men from all around to support their fellow women. We are all humans. Different viewpoints from different types of people. It is necessary to move into a new age of human progress. Thank you all for tuning in, and have a great night.